Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, I'm going to be going over my first impressions for the Journey Together expansion. We finally got all the cards for this set. Gonna be a really interesting one because it's gonna coincide with, of course, our rotation. And this is, of course, the first set that announces trainer Pokemon, which is the announcement from the previous World Championships as the big reveal that this sort of mechanic is coming back. We're going to have a number of Pokemon that have a trainer in the right bottom of their artwork, and there's going to be some item cards and some synergies among these sorts of trainer Pokemon that will signify how we build certain archetypes and also highlight these cards for additional synergies, which is a really interesting mechanic in the TCG. Now, I'm going to go into much more detail about the impact of this rotation. I think it's massive, by the way, but just as a very quick, brief rundown while we think about these cards and what the format is going to be looking like coming into the Journey Together meta, I did just want to highlight some big things. So just in terms of decks that immediately are scraped off because they are no longer in the format, we lose Regidrago, Lugia, Block Snorlax, Lost Box, as well as Palkia variants. But then very much the bigger picture is how engines are going to be adapting. A lot of the Stage 2 archetypes have really been reliant on an Arven package, using that Forest Seal Stone, helping you get multiple Stage 2 Pokemon developed alongside these V Pokemon. Obviously, Luminion can cherry pick key supporter cards, but Rotom's also being a really big inclusion for the likes of Charizard, Dragapult to an extent as well, to just get into play, get a bunch of cards to end your turn on that draw, so that you have enough options for that following turn. Luminion being the sort of more versatile card that goes in all sorts of archetypes, increasing our outs towards, most critically, I think either Iono or Boss's Orders are the big cards that stand out. So that's also going to adapt our deck building. I think the next thing to discuss is the turbo engine that we've seen as of late. Pokestop, Radiant Greninja, to an extent Trekking Shoes as well. These cards are also exiting the format. That's going to greatly reduce the speed at which we can get Raging Bolt into play. Golden Go is going to lose a lot of its draw power. Archaludon loses a lot of its discard synergy. Roaring Moon and Ancient Box lose a lot of their draw and discard synergy. They kind of need both. And even Ceruledge very much relies on these cards as well right now. So a bunch of the decks in the game are really reliant on this one Radiant for a bunch of draw power and Pokestop to give us additional cycle to have this critical massive item cards. That is going to be far less impactful going into our new age of deck building. And then finally, just a couple other critical notes. We're losing Double Turbo Energy, which is massive for the Terapagos archetype and the Clorf archetype. Of course, Terapagos does have access to Glass Trumpet, but the basic energy build hasn't really seen any success as of yet. And of course, you lose Radiant Greninja, which would have been one of your better ways to dump a bunch of energy. And Manaphy's leaving the format as well. This is one of the only protections that our evolving archetypes can have. You know, Charizard, Gardevoir, which also loses Curlier, by the way. It looks like a bunch of these archetypes will forego Manaphy altogether. Yes, there are some like Stage 1 options out there right now, but typically the Manaphy is the most splashable, most easily searchable, and critically the one you can get into play on turn 1 going second without a big combo coming together, and that's no longer going to be an option for the format. So we really have to start taking these spread attacks a lot more seriously as we start analysing the Journey Together cards. With that quick refresher out the way, let's get into the trainer cards for Journey Together. We get a reprint of Super Potion, not a really high impact card, but it's worth noting that Dragapult is one of the archetypes that doesn't lose a whole lot to rotation just on the surface of it. So this could be a go-to tech inclusion to add some healing to your list. I'll come back to the trainer-specific stuff when we talk about them all in one go. So then we have the exchange ticket, which after counting your prize cards, you can shuffle them and put them to the bottom of your deck. Then you can take that many cards from the top of your deck and put them as your new face-down prize cards. Of course, we lose Hisuian Heavy Ball, which was a card I absolutely adored in the formats. This one still has a bit of jeopardy towards it in that you don't know the top contents of your deck. So in the process of removing some awkward cards from your current prizes, you could end up still taking cards off the top of your deck and creating more or equally as awkward prizes. I think on the surface, this item card isn't that fantastic, but there may be those archetypes that are so devastated by bad prizing that it may be a worthwhile inclusion in those sorts of builds. And quickly onto the generic supporters, we have Iris's Fighting Spirits. You discard a card from your hand. If you do, you can draw it until you have 6 in hand. This is a reprint of Volkner's Philosophy. The card really didn't do much in its own meta, and I feel like we have better ones in our format as well. Ruffian is an interesting supporter card in that it can discard a tool and a special energy from one of your opponent's Pokemon. We lose Lost Vacuum to this rotation, so it's this card alongside the Jamming Tower, which can target opponent's tools, and I'm already looking at one on the screen that's quite terrifying, so it's good to keep this card in mind. Brock Scouting is one of those choose one style supporter cards. You can either search your deck for up to 2 basic Pokemon and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck, or you can search your deck for an evolution Pokemon and put it into your hand. It's not the strongest effect in the world for standard, but it's definitely an upgrade on previous basic searches because it doesn't have the same diminishing returns as you progress through the game. And it gives you some defense against Budew as well, so that's at least something going for this card. I could see it being in low counts just to fill out your curve of supporters in evolving archetypes. And then for the generic stadium cards, we have Levincia, which allows you, once during each player's turn, to put 2 basic lightning energy from your discard pile into your hand. This does have immediate synergy with some of the Ionos-based lightning cards, but also this could be a really useful card for Golden Go as well. We no longer need that splash of water within the deck list because Palkia V-Star rotates. We could easily have like 3 or 4 copies of lightning energy alongside our metal, and also that smorgasbord of other types for the Energy Search Pro A-Spec. Knowing that this stadium card, alongside our superior energy retrieval, can be another way that we can do some great hand gymnastics going up and down in hand size for our discard synergy, whilst at the same time being an energy retrieval that can sit in play, which can give you good Iono proofing, and whenever you get to use this one card multiple times, it's amazing value for you. And there's one new special energy, the Spike energy. It provides colorless, and if the Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot and is damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, put 2 counters on the attacking Pokemon. I'm not super impressed by this effect. I think there's still a lot of archetypes that require specific colours of energy, so there aren't that many archetypes that could take advantage of this card in the first place. And even in that scenario, I feel like things like Jet Energy would take precedent as a special colourless energy within the majority of archetypes. So I'm not seeing this one having a huge impact. Now we're going to cover some of the specific trainers, and I'm going to start off with N's Pokemon in addition to the N's PP Up, which allows us to attach 1 basic energy from your discard pile to one of your benched N's Pokemon. So Dark Patch does rotate, of course, but we will have 4 copies of this item card, which is going to be a really important way to accelerate to our N's Pokemon. We'll see momentarily that there are some that do like to have discard synergy. And of course, the Zoroark EX has the trade ability, so we can naturally discard our energy that then opens up the N's PP Up to be live throughout the game. The other N's Synergy card is a stadium, it's N's Castle, and each N's Pokemon in play has no retreat cost. Straight away, I'm thinking about Budew here. It means we can get into a Budew easily ourselves, but also we can't easily get trapped by a Budew, or if our opponent is attempting a trapping play, we are still able to play a stadium card and get out of those situations. We have to start thinking critically about Budew throughout a number of matchups now, so that's already a really good thing for you. And of course, we want to be using the PP Up on the bench, so naturally we will want to have this pivot within our archetype, I imagine. Moving on to N's Pokemon then, it's only natural that we start with the N's Zoroark EX. It has 280 hit points, it's a dark type, and it has the trade ability. Zoroark is back, you can discard a card from your hand in order to use this ability, and then you draw 2 cards. It also has the Knight's Joker attack for 2 Darkness Energy. You can choose one of your benched N's Pokemon's attacks and use it as this attack. So it looks like the N's Zoroark is going to be not only the draw engine, but also the main attacker in this archetype. Similar to Mew VMAX, where we're going to be copying a lot of our bench dudes. The N's Reshiram is the first one that springs to mind. It's a Dragon-type Pokemon that has the powerful Rage attack for Fire and Lightning. It does 20 times the amount of damage counters on this Pokemon. Not impressive when you're using it on the Reshiram, but when you're copying it from the Zoroark, that can be really handy into some lower damage output matchups, where suddenly they can punch into you, and then Zoroark can swing back with a huge chunk. But just generally, you have now a standard 170 baseline option. It's not a fantastic number, but with weakness, you still KO Mew EX, which is important, and you still catch out Squawkabilly EX. These are still some of the most prevalent 2-prize engine Pokemon that will be remaining in our format. So that standard damage output is still a way for Zoroark to take out some cheap prize cards early on in games. And for the remainder of the game, they have to play around Powerful Rage if they are this lower damage output archetype. I think the other crucial partner in the N's deck is going to be this Darmanitan. It has 140 hit points and has the Backdraft attack for 2 colourless energy. It does 30 times the amount of energy in your opponent's discard pile. 30 is actually a massive multiplier, and obviously the first one that comes to mind is punishing Ceruledge. But I do think this can easily also punish Golden Go, because of course you can actually attack with this card, you can still power it up with the N's PP Up, and you have that really important Fire-type coverage. Zoroark is weak to Grass, so having the Darmanitan in the deck list gives you a single prize attacking Pokemon that could actually be used to help cover your Grass weakness, helping you KO things like the Teal Mask Ogerpon. The second attack is also going to be massive in this archetype. For Fire Colorless, you deal 90 to the active, you discard all energy from this Pokemon, and then you can also choose one of your opponent's bench Pokemon and deal 90 damage to that. Like I said, there's going to be far less frequent bench protection in the format, and that discard isn't so painful when you're just getting rid of 2 dark energy with patch already in our list. Or if you really want to, we can weave in some reversal energy in the 60 and actually attack with a single prize Pokemon. I feel like that's going to be a really good option. I can see something like Cypher Maniac making it into these end Zoroark builds, so even having 1 or 2 reversal in your list definitely sounds reasonable to me to utilize this as a single prize threat. There are a couple other notable ends Pokemon. I feel like the Joltik won't see a huge amount of play, but could be this like niche tech card. It has the crackling short attack. Before doing damage, discard all tools from your opponent's active Pokemon. If you discarded a tool in this way, your opponent's active is now paralyzed. I could foresee this being decent against the Clefairy archetype. I imagine they're going to be utilizing Latias EX, so Paralysis in theory should be doing a lot against them, and we're also very threatened by their tools, so this is immediately a tech card if the Lily's Clefairy deck becomes a big deal. There's also ends Sigilif. It has the Victory Sigil attack, which is fairly interesting. For Psychic and 2 colorless, or just being copied with 2 dark energy more than likely from Zoroark, if you have exactly 1 prize card remaining, use this attack and win the game. Essentially, this plays around the opponent forcing the 7 prize game, as we like to call it. Zoroark doesn't naturally have the best damage output. We've seen that it's either 170, a 90-90 spread, or if the opponent happens to hit into us, then we're doing really good damage. But there's no guarantee that the Zoroark archetype will have that massive O-hit KO potential, so the Sigilif could actually still be a useful card for you to close out games. Then there's also the Ends Purloin. It has the Pilfer attack for dark and colourless. You deal 30, your opponent reveals their hand, and you put a card you find there to the bottom of their deck. This obviously points towards having it alongside an INO play. I think there's still plenty of on-board engine draw Pokemon that I don't think this is going to be a big option in the game. But if certain archetypes pop up that don't have a great draw engine and just rely on the likes of Pheasantipity EX, we can potentially try and make comeback plays with Purloin Pilfer alongside INO to get us back into a decent position. The small concern for me is how many one-hit KO archetypes are going to be in the metagame. That really neuters the amount you can do with the Night Joker attack. But bear in mind, Zoroark GX back in the day only did 120 damage with Righteous Beating, and it still became dominant force in the metagame just because of that tradability alone. Let's jump over to Hops synergy cards then. We start off with the item card Hops Bag. You can search your deck for 2 basic Hops Pokemon and put them directly onto your bench. So it's like a Buddy Buddy Poffin effect, but for Hops Mons. That's going to be absolutely fantastic. We know that there are going to be some really important bench-sitting basics for Hop. There's also the Hops Choice Band tool card. When the Hops Pokemon this card is attached to uses an attack, that attack costs 1 colorless energy fewer and does 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. This is honestly one of the strongest tool cards we've ever seen. Having both damage modification and energy attachment reduction is crazy, and in fact that means that there's going to be a number of Pokemon within this deck list that can attack for 0 energy now, and the damage ramp doesn't actually stop there because we also have the Post-Wick Stadium card that says the attacks of Hops Pokemon do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. But wait, there's more! Hops Snorlax also has the Big Belly ability. The attacks of your Hops Pokemon do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon, and this effect cannot stack, fortunately, but that means that with Stadium, Tool, and a Snorlax in play, all of these Hops Pokemon can deal an additional 90 damage total. Snorlax may not just be a bench-sitting Pokemon either. Its base damage is 140, but actually 170 thanks to Big Belly, and that 3 energy attack cost immediately goes down to 2 energy if you're adding on that Choice Band. That's when you're starting to KO some of the basic EXs in formats. Dynamic Press does deal 80 to yourself, so it's not an attack you can spam, but Snorlax does have the opportunity to uptrade into certain basics, whilst also being a critical damage mod in the deck. Really, really powerful card that will go in every Hop build. Now that we've seen the damage mods, let's talk about Hops Zacian EX. It has 230 hit points and has the Close Cleave attack for 1 colorless, or 0 if you're using that choice band. You do 30 base, or 120 if you have all your mods, whilst doing a 30 bench damage snipe. So Hops Zacian gets to the races, definitely starts targeting a lot of your opponent's basics early on, which is very, very solid, but also has the Brave Slash attack. Now this is an expensive one. For 3 metal and 1 colorless, it does 240, and you can't use Brave Slash next turn. Again, if we add all of those modifiers, we can reach that 330 number. It would be a big combination, and we also need to find the right energy acceleration for Zacian, but the potential is here to have really good early game with Close Cleave, and really, really powerful turns with Brave Slash when we can get that online. For me, the 2 synergies that remain post-rotation that stand out to me are going to be Metang and Archaludon. Archaludon EX, of course, needing a new home, a new partner, because we lose that Dialga V-Star. Archaludon also being like a solid card just to weave in on certain turns. It's a real nuisance with 300 hit points, and that 220 threshold is something that's sort of in between Zacian's range. You're either committing loads of resources to get a big KO, or just trying to dink and dive through the single prizes. Archaludon fits right in the middle of that, helping you deal with some of the basic EXs in format a little bit easier. The upside of Metang, though, is that, like I said with Snorlax, you can weave in more of these single prize Pokemon. Cramorant's a really, really strong one as well here. 110 hit points and has the Fickle Spit attack for 1 colorless. You deal 120, and if your opponent doesn't have exactly 3 or 4 prize cards remaining, this attack does nothing. So it's the return of Baby Buzzwole. This time it's on a colorless Pokemon, which is very balanced because you have so much mod with this card. Again, there's the potential to plus 90 here with Snorlax Band and Stadium. 210 being that critical number to deal with Teal Mask Ogerpon EX, but also Fezandipity EX. That's probably going to be even more critical going into the post-rotation format as we lose out on a bunch of other engine Pokemon in the game. This Cramorant is going to be so integral to the archetype because it's going to mean you can float energy attachments onto Zacian, building up more threats in the back, whilst representing a single prize knockout as well, without committing any energy attachments. There's also the Stage 1 Hops Dubwool, as well as Hops Wooloo, which, by the way, is a colorless Pokemon that you can grab with Fan Rotom, or you can grab with the Hops Bag. So we have a lot of searchability for this basic Pokemon, making me think this is going to be a very powerful and usable Stage 1. Even though Zacian is going to require bench spaces for some amount of Metang and Archaludon EX, I still feel like it's most likely going to play at least a 1-1 line of this Dubwool because of the Hops Bag, giving you extra access to the basics in the opening stages, essentially for free. The ability then, Challenge Horn, when you evolve up into this Dubwool, you can switch in one of your opponent's bench Pokemon to the active. It's the return of Lycanroc, of Luxray GL Level X, of Ninetales. You know, we've had so many of these effects throughout the years. I think without getting too carried away, this will be a powerful card in the format. It seems like the Hops deck really needs to have a lot of the combination pieces. It needs to constantly have choice bands, constantly wants to have its own stadium in play, and probably needs to keep up on energy attachments throughout the game, which makes me think it has to constantly be using research and other supporter cards to draw throughout the game, which means Dubwool is going to really chip in, so you still have those gusting effects without the need for boss's orders, and having this other really specific amount of cards in your hand at one time. That being said, I think Hops Dubwool could go into all sorts of archetypes. Again, with that Fan Rotom being such a powerful card, some Area 0 archetypes could get a combination of Noctowl and Wooloo, which could be really, really dangerous to threaten. It's actually very possible that we're going to see a move towards Area 0 for the likes of Raging Bolt, and that currently uses Pokemon catchers, so having more guarantees from a Stage 1 Pokemon could be really interesting. Also, we're going to take a look at the Lily's Clefairy EX. That definitely wants to fill out its bench size to deal more damage with the Rondo attack, so having a Dubwool as a great ability to utilize could also be looked into. It's a really versatile card, and based on the engines in the metagame right now, I think there's a lot of support for it, so there will be a few homes for this ability, I think. We just mentioned Clefairy EX, so we may as well take a look at some of the Lily's cards here. The Lily's Pearl is a ridiculous tool card. If the Lily's Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, that player takes 1 fewer prize card. Honestly, absolutely crazy effect, but think back to the Resolute Heart of Pikachu EX in our current format. A number of archetypes find ways to get around the knockout from damage text via status conditions or via Monkey Dory or via damage counter placement from Dragapult. There are ways around this tool card, so don't fret just yet. At the same time, though, be aware that we are losing Lost Vacuum, and Jamming Tower is going to be a crucial card that can help other archetypes that don't have those inbuilt means around KOing via damage in order to still get around this Lily's Pearl card. And also bear in mind that Hop's Choice Band is a crucial tool in that archetype, so Jamming Tower seems like it's going to be really jumping up in value to be a crazy card in a number of decks. Honestly, I think most of Lily's Pokemon are trash. The Rabombe can force your opponent to put some basics onto the bench, but the Cutiefly has terrible hit points. The Rabombe has terrible hit points. Even though this has free retreat cost, I'm very skeptical of this being a decent card. The Comfey can get a bunch of your basics out, but they all have to be Lily's Pokemon, and like I just said, I don't want Lily's Cutiefly on my board, so I don't think this is going to be as good as just using something like a Precious Trolley in my deck, especially because Arven seems really good in this list, because you want to get Lily's Pearl out as quickly as possible, as well as filling your bench, so Trolley Arven still seems better than going for a Comfey attack and committing energy away from your Clefairy. Which I think means that Lily's Clefairy EX has license to have all sorts of Pokemon chilling on its bench. The Clefairy only has 190 hit points, and its Full Moon Rondo attack is the same as all of those legendary dogs. This time it's a Psychic Colorless attack, but it's 20 plus 20 more for each benched Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's. Area Zero is going to be really handy here, so there's a few directions I think this can go. Obviously, we need a terrestrial Pokemon, so if we want to, we can play the Noctowl engine in addition to Dubwool, so Fan Rotom can get a bunch of our basics going early, then suddenly Clefairy is threatening Gust from all sorts of situations, and Noctowl is a great engine mon. Also, because of the attack cost, we could also start thinking about Xatu coming into the deck list to give you some extra energy acceleration and a bit of additional draw power. At the same time, there's the sort of forgotten combination of Solrock Lunatone that we got from Obsidian Flames way back when, that stops the effect of your opponent's stadium cards. So now, the Jamming Tower your opponent's trying to use to get around your Pearl is no longer going to have their desired effect, making Clefairy a really, really solid beat stick as a single prize Pokemon again. I haven't even mentioned the ability yet. Clefairy could be played just for that alone. The weakness of each of your opponent's Dragon Pokemon in play is now Psychic. Gardevoir EX does still exist technically, but once you lose Refinement, the archetype really does fall down quite a lot. So I think Clefairy's own ability helps itself more than anything else, but this has the potential to be a tech card in the future if any of these Psychic-based archetypes are struggling with the Dragapult matchup specifically. There's also a handful of Iono's Pokemon to go over. I think it's worth starting with the Bellibolt EX, 280 hit points, and has the Electro Streamer ability. As often as you like during a turn, you may attach a basic Lightning Energy from your hand to one of your Iono's Pokemon. So stage 1 Rain Dance for exactly Iono's mons can be very, very devastating. The Bellibolt EX itself has the Thunderous Bolt attack for 3 lightning, 1 colorless. It deals 230, and this Pokemon can't attack during your next turn. It's a fairly expensive cost, but it doesn't matter too much because you can just rain these into play as and when you need to. It's nice to see that the sort of main engine mon in the deck has decent bulk and a decent attack behind it to help you get through at least the majority of the basic EXs in formats. Then there's Iono's Kilowattrel. It has the Flash Draw ability, which is really, really busted, I think. You have to discard a Lightning Energy from this Pokemon in order to use it, but once during a turn, you may draw until you have 6 cards in your hand. We are losing Bibarel to rotation, so that's no longer an option anyway, but this is a +1 card on Bibarel, provided that you preload a Lightning Energy onto this card. That's going to be the best case scenario, actually, sitting with a 1 Lightning Energy Kilowattrel, so that if your opponent is going to hand disrupt you, you can just remove it and get drawing back into some cards. That's what makes it quite different from Revavroom, even though they kind of read the same. You're both spending an energy in some sort of way to get that draw power, but the crucial element of Revavroom is that you need to have an energy in hand. Kilowattrel needs an energy on the board, and you can pre-do that, especially with Bellibolt EX, of course. So it can be done during your turn, but also you can end your turn prepping to utilize it at the start of your next turn, which is what makes it so crazy. Weirdly enough, we also have to respect this Iono's Voltorb. It has the Chain Bolt attack for 2 colorless energy. You do 20 plus 20 more for each lightning attached to your Iono's Pokemon. I think this is weirdly enough going to be the single prize attacking option within the deck list. As you load up a bunch of these Bellibolts, as you load up multiple Kilowattrel, you can just have 2 energy in the active for that Voltorb. It might take a little while to ramp up this damage output, but honestly, I think you are going to have a silly amount of lightning energy scattered across a lot of your Pokemon. So I wouldn't sleep on this Voltorb. I think it will get to really dangerous damage output. I'm almost certain that the Iono archetype is going to utilize Scramble Switch in the deck because, hey, look, we're using Lightning Energy, let's rain a bunch onto an Iono's mon, then scramble into Iron Hands, and suddenly we have this amazing threat that can uptrade with a bunch of prizes. It's also worth noting that there's Lightning Energy in the attack cost of Raging Bolt EX, of course, and if the engine that we know right now isn't going to be viable in the future, aka we lose Greninja and we lose Pokestop, it could be the case that we go to a bunch of these Stage 1 Pokemon. It's like a really different way of playing Raging Bolt to how we know it, so it may be unintuitive right now, but it may end up being the more stable option than trying to keep using the Sada engine with far less support cards around it. And then just one tiny other note, all of these cards are obviously profitable, but we could also think about having Miraidon EX in the list as well. Still a decent option when you're playing Lightning stuff to bear in mind, where you can just keep getting these out over and over again. So in terms of reloading those Voltorb, reloading your Tadbulb, that sort of stuff, it's going to be a great card that can sit into play. So I do think the Iono's archetype still has a decent amount of legs, even though its damage output doesn't look all that appealing just yet, because you are often going to be utilizing a single prizer, you have a really good single prize engine Pokemon that sits in play. I still think there are some legs here. As for other interesting Pokemon that don't have a trainer associated with them, we have the Volcanion EX. Its Scorching Steam ability is quite interesting. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in your active spot, you can make your opponent's active Pokemon burned. That's a guaranteed 20 damage during Pokemon Checkup, and of course we have the Latias EX in format, so that chunky 3 retreat cost doesn't have to be a headache for you. If we have these Area Zero archetypes, if we have the bench space, having Volcanion as a pivot option can be a great deal. We just saw the Lily's Pearl, that's a reason to knock out during Pokemon Checkup. There's also, of course, Pheasantipity EX going to be in a bunch of archetypes, so having this as a plus 20 damage mod could be really valuable in a number of of decks. And in fact, actually the Lily's deck might need to utilize it as well to force KOs with its Rondo attack. There's also a very chunky Mamoswine EX, 340 hit points. Its Mammoth carry ability can search for a Pokemon every turn and add it to your hand. And then the Rumbling March attack does 180 plus 40 more for each stage 2 Pokemon on your bench. There's still the Luxray, of course, so if you go behind, you can end up putting a bunch of these stage 2s into play all in one go, and naturally your ability does gravitate towards thinking about things like Pidgeot EX coming into the list. The lack of acceleration could be a concern for how much one-hit KO I feel like there still will be in the format, but against a number of archetypes, a slow attach option with this card wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. With its type coverage also looking like pretty reasonable still. It's probably a little bit too dreamer, but I really like this ability. It's been strong on a lot of cards in the past as well, so it wouldn't be a card that I sleep on. Especially when Little Swinub also has the Call for Family attack. That's always going to help out these sorts of archetypes. Whenever you go second, you know that you at least have this to get into games, which is always a relief, I think. Lycanroc can reload that spike energy that we talked about, but I'm still not impressed by the card overall. There's synergy between the ability and the attack, but I still feel like this is going to be a little bit too much work, and expecting your opponent to do the sort of damage for you in a lot of these cases typically isn't really a viable approach. There's a stage 2 Tyranitar with the Daunting Stubbornness ability. While this Pokemon is in the active spot, your opponent can't play item cards from their hand. And then it has the Crackling Stomp attack for Dark and Colorless, dealing 150 and discard the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. Of course, there's already Budew in the format, so you can start off with some Itchy Pollens whilst you build up multiple Tyranitar, and ideally you're building a board state just trying to get these Tyranitar into play to lock the opponent out of item cards entirely throughout the game. Now, the reason why I'm not too concerned by that is I think it's still a slow development for you to get your own Tyranitar developed. Of course, opponents can boss around this card and still gain access to item cards. And naturally, because there's a fear of Budew in the game, or at least an awareness of that card, archetypes will be adapting and be prepared ultimately for a number of turns of a Budew, and will have means of getting into the game without a heavy reliance on those item cards. So even though this is really scary text to print, I think the damage output isn't strong enough on this card. It can't tank well enough. And I think just sort of the context of the format, we don't have to be too terrified of T-Tar. There's a Magearna that has the auto heal ability. As long as this Pokemon is in your active, whenever you attach an energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon, heal 90 damage from that Pokemon. I think we had a Miltank like this in the past. I think it was a decent card when Reshiram Charizard first came out. And again, if Dragapult is going to be in the format, this can be a pretty good check to that. Of course, you have to get the Magearna in and out of the active position. It's not always going to be ideal for you, but certainly a card to bear in mind, especially when it has a little bit of extra draw on its own attack that can bail you out of really terrible hands. The final card that really caught my eye was the Dudunsparce EX. It's a stage 1 with 270 hit points and has the Adversity Tail attack. For just one colourless, you do 60 for each of your opponent's Pokemon EX in play. That could be a really nice punish for a number of archetypes that go wide and utilise their Area 0. Again, looking at the Raging Bolts, possibly looking at Clefairy, depending on what basics it opts for. Miraidon EX could still be in the format, of course. It still keeps its Electric Generator, still keeps the majority of its most powerful attackers. I do think Dudunsparce is going to be a really nice option, mainly because we already have a pretty solid ability Dudunsparce in formats that can give you some additional draw. So having like a 2-1-1 split, or having a thicker line of the single prize Dudunsparce, adding in just one copy of this EX, you can end up giving yourself a chance into a matchup or two just by virtue of this EX as a one-of. Another nice bonus of the card is for 3 colours, you do 150, and you get through all effects of your opponent's active Pokemon. There are still really annoying walling Pokemon in the game, even though Snorlax is rotating, so we always have to still think about these sorts of attacks. Making the Dudunsparce just even more versatile, it can help out against these decks that like to swarm EXs in the metagame, but also can be helpful against the annoying walling mons. Even more reason to like this card as a colourless inclusion as a great tech. So that's my first impressions. If you want to read all the cards and some of the ones that I missed potentially, go to PokemonProxies.com. All of the scans are there. You can easily download them. You can print them off, get testing in the new format. Bear in mind, rotation is going to be a factor. I started to discuss it a little bit here and there, but of course, me and Jack are going to be doing a more detailed video of rotation as it becomes pertinent. I really tried to have a stream of consciousness just of what I'm thinking of from the offset from these archetypes, but I haven't really got pen to paper just yet in exactly how I want to build these lists. So hopefully I gave a good idea, even though it's still a little bit abstract right now. Let me hear your thoughts on all the cards we discussed down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.